I'm Robert McCready at Evening Magic on Twitter. Katharine Spehar works in mental health administration, is a communication and life coach, a blogger, a public school food critic, a linguist, a daughter, a capitalist, my friend and mutual follower on Twitter. Thank you, Katharine Spehar.
Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm really excited to talk to you because one time we had a very interesting Twitter space where you taught me about food, specifically meat and vegetables, and also terrain theory. And I wanted to start with food. I mentioned in the bio that you're a public school food critic, and when we see shootings or violence in the news, or when people make stupid decisions for public school food, I always see you pop up. The algorithm knows I want to hear what you have to say about food. So, what is your food philosophy?
So that's a great question. And if you go to my Twitter profile, bio, the first two words or three words are real food lover. That might seem sort of self-explanatory, but in today's world where there are so many artificial, fake meats coming out and genetically modified organisms, I think it's really important for us to get back to our roots in terms of the food that we consume. And I would say that I derive my love of food very much from my mother, who passed away 2 years ago, and she loved food. She loved cooking. Cooking was definitely her love language, and she also loved gardening. So we grew up with a very large vegetable garden. I wrote a post on my blog about that and our experience of building up the soil over time. So I developed especially my love of fresh vegetables from my childhood and from working with my mom in the garden. I think it's really important for people to be as close to their food as possible, especially now with so many questions, as I said, about where our food is coming from. So I really encourage people to shop locally as much as possible, go to farmers markets, find local suppliers, eat as many real foods and whole foods as possible, and try to avoid processed foods. I mean, sometimes we can't avoid them if we're traveling or we go to some party or event, but certainly trying to focus as much as possible. In my own life, I've gone through so many different programs and nutritional systems that I've followed over the last probably 16, 17 years in order to develop my own health. And my current program is really focused a lot on sort of a modified version of paleo. With it does include meat, it does include eggs, some dairy products, lots of vegetables, especially cooked vegetables, and really no fruit or sweets, and certain grains in very limited quantities. So that's related to a special nutritional program that I'm following. I don't necessarily say everyone needs to follow that diet. And then as far as there are individual differences. Some people may need more or less fat in their diet, depending on their metabolic rate, which is also known as their oxidation rate. So there's a lot of variation in what may be appropriate for people at a given time.
One of the things that you do that is different than what is the trend right now is that you don't eat fruits. I think even paleo allows berries. But you do have vegetables, which some of the fruit and meat eater are against. They're against vegetables because of lectins.
Sure.
Why does your program differ in that way from not really the mainstream, but something that's popular?
Sure. And within the vegetables, there are certain vegetables that are preferred and others that are not as desirable to consume. And again, I do not credit myself as the developer of this program. It's just a program that I have been following. So again, this is definitely not, even within the alternative zone, this would not be a sort of a mainstream alternative view. So with fruits do have a lot of sugars. They are also quite, if you talk about macrobiotic terms, they're quite yin, and a lot of people's bodies are very yin in today's world, especially since the introduction of the atomic bomb and the radiation that we have in the environment. And we certainly have that here in New Mexico, where I live. Also, fruits tend to, especially modern fruits, can be quite hybridized. They sometimes tend to have a lot of toxic potassium in them that can be impacting the body in a negative way. So my program that I follow, and I realize that may be not the direction we were originally going in this conversation, my program that I follow is really focused on the minerals in the body and balancing the mineral ratios and replenishing reserves of minerals. And vegetables, cooked vegetables especially, are an important part of that.
All right.
And it's funny because I actually, now that I've been following this program for more than 10 years, I really don't crave fruit or sweets, excuse me, anymore.
Where in New Mexico are you zooming us from?
I am coming to you from Albuquerque, where I moved about 7 years ago.
All right, excellent. Do you have a garden in Albuquerque?
I do not at this time. It's certainly my dream to have one at some point. Although I will say, because I do have friends who garden, and I do talk with the farmers when I go to the farmers market. This is a harsh environment in which to grow things because it's very dry. There isn't a lot of rain, and the soil can be quite sandy in some places. So getting things to grow is very challenging and requires a lot of TLC, I would say, as well as maybe some special expertise.
Speaking of special expertise, I listened to a Zen talk that came out of Apaya. I don't know how to pronounce it. And this man named Cato Troy, he has kind of a long name. He's a psychiatrist in Santa Fe, talked about the orchard, the apple orchard with his father and how they had to direct water a certain way. And it took years and years to get the soil prepared to accept the water. And even when certain trees died, you still kept watering them because they could still have a little bit of life left in them and it kept the soil going. If you were growing a garden right now, what would you absolutely be growing for yourself? And what would you absolutely not be growing for yourself?
So that's a great question. Are you asking about a garden that I could grow anywhere with any type of climate conditions, or here in New Mexico? Because we're a little bit more limited in things that we can grow.
You
So
can answer that any way that you want.
Okay. So I would say if I had a garden, I would be growing, and I'm just going to talk to you about what I would grow. These things, obviously, you plant according to the season, and you don't plant everything at once. Certain vegetables or plants are planted at certain time, and then they mature and are harvested at other times. So, and again, I'm thinking back to my mom and the incredible organizational skills she used in planning her garden. It was really remarkable. But I would certainly grow carrots. Carrots are a big part of my diet, and carrots are delicious. They also tend to grow well in the soil here in New Mexico. So I would certainly grow carrots. I would grow probably a little bit of lettuce because it's always nice to have some fresh greens at this time of year. And actually, back to your earlier question, I don't really buy lettuce from the store because it doesn't really taste good. I wait until it's in season and I can purchase it from the farmer's market and have it super fresh. And also like to know the people who grow my food. I would grow broccoli. I would grow cauliflower. I would grow Brussels sprouts. I would grow onions. Those are the first things that come to my mind. Green beans for sure. Probably some types of peas like snow peas, snap peas, and then the regular peas that you shell. So those would be some things that come to mind. Probably also some summer squash like zucchini or the yellow squash, maybe also some butternut squash. Some of the winter squashes are also really good. Those are some things that come to mind immediately. I probably wouldn't grow too much on the side of nightshades because I tend to avoid those. So tomatoes, eggplant, peppers, even though I love all of them, those are things that I tend to avoid.
Is that because of the sugar content? Because I know tomato they say is almost a fruit or
Well, tomato is a fruit, and you've got the seeds inside. However, it's more because nightshades tend to be inflammatory to the body. So, and they're also, again, on the macrobiotic scale, they tend to be more on the yin side. So I'm not going to tell you I never eat tomatoes, but it's certainly not something that I would grow.
you said on the yin side?
On the yin side. So, and you have more yin and more yang.
Okay, which so carrots are young.
Carrots, yes, because they're growing in the ground, right, in their roots. So other root root vegetables like turnips are also good. Radishes. I'm eating a lot of little turnips and radishes right now, and carrots, because those are in season and that's what they have available for sale. And I do eat the greens also, and they're so incredibly delicious. I had some for lunch today.
So when we talk about the yin and yang, I'm used to calling them a yin yang, and I
Mm-hmm.
know the symbol, the black and
Mm-hmm.
white with the circles, the opposite color circle in each one, and I know that the popular culture, what I've learned from that is there's a little bit of good and everything bad, and a little bit of bad and everything and good. How do you apply that to vegetables?
So that's a really good question. Um, I would say I try to focus on the ones that are more young, that because we're trying to in the program that I'm following, we're trying to make the body more young because we are in a very yin environment today. So focus on those, and then the others that are might have some other benefits, like tomatoes. To eat those in smaller quantities. For example, when I travel or if I'm cooking for my dad, I'm going to use things that I don't normally cook with at home.
So yin is when we say a yin environment, I think frenetic, and yang, I would guess, would be more relaxed. Is that how you define those terms?
It's yin is also can be more in some ways, I think, more expanded, and even more, if again back to Chinese medicine, can be a little bit more damp, and many people do have an excess of that, and I am not an expert on Chinese medicine at all, so that's, I think, kind of the way it's seen.
Is yin feminine
Yin would be the feminine, yes.
and yang is masculine?
Would be the more masculine. And of
Uh,
course, as individuals and psychologically, we do have both elements. And I mean, that's a topic that's of a lot of discussion, right? In the general community, people are talking about what does it mean to be a man or to be a woman, and there are certain stereotypes, and of course, we all have elements of each.
I remember um, Virginia Woolf. There was a quote of Virginia Woolf, and it was on Facebook when Facebook was first beginning, and I remember the guy who posted it, and he said, it is better, or is best, it's betterest to be a man womanly or a woman manly." And I thought it was kind of interesting, but now those terms are kind of, the binary is chucked out the window. So I'm not sure how that would even, I don't even know how that big it would apply today if Virginia Woolf put it that way.
It's an interesting question, and of course, Virginia Woolf was herself looking to expand beyond traditional gender stereotypes for women, and that's another area, of course, that I'm very interested in, being a woman, and having attended a women's college and being very kind of steeped in that, thinking about what does it mean to be a woman in today's world. And I have a blog post in draft that I'm writing about that, and thinking about the roles of women and what I experienced in my own family and what I've experienced in my own life. And certainly there are many challenges to balancing all those aspects.
Where can we find that blog post when you're publishing it?
Sure. So my blog is located on my website, which is to promote my life and communication coaching services. That's something I do on the side in addition to my day job. So my website is my name. So do you want me to spell it out now?
Sure.
Okay, sure. So my name is it's katharinespehar.com, but it's Katharinespehar.com. So if you just Google my name, you'll get to my blog as well as Substack. I do publish articles occasionally on Substack. I had to start using Substack because my website, which I do through Squarespace, does not allow for footnotes. And I started doing some research articles that had footnotes. So I kind of have one foot in each camp right now, which is maybe not the best from a branding point of view, but it works for me to have both of those platforms.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the radioactivity in the air, especially the fact, New Mexico used to have the atomic bomb tests. How can a person know if there's radiation in the air?
That is something I have not really looked into. So I do focus on trying to keep myself as healthy as possible and hoping that my body will support itself in detoxifying whatever's in the environment. But radiation is not an area that I've looked into.
Okay, so it's we should just be aware that radiation is in the environment and we should protect against it.
So there are different types of radiation. And when I'm talking about radiation in the environment, when I made a reference to it earlier, I'm talking about ionizing radiation that you get from nuclear bomb, X-rays, and so on. There's also non-ionizing radiation from electromagnetic fields. And that is also really omnipresent, and we can't do much about the fact that we have to get x-rays. Sometimes we want to limit those x-rays. We can't do much about the fact that atomic bombs were tested in New Mexico, so those are circumstances that we are dealing with. But in terms of non-ionizing radiation, I may have written a little bit about this in one or two of my blog posts. I first became very interested in the subject when I was living in Canada, and I became acquainted with the author of a book called Motorcycle Cancer. And he introduced me to an understanding of extremely low frequency electromagnetic radiation, which can come from the seat of a motorcycle, hence the book Motorcycle Cancer. And anybody who wants to can check out that book. There's also a video on this topic on YouTube, an interview with the author of the book, whose name is Randall Dale Chipkar. I knew him well. He happened to own the building that I lived in when I lived in the Toronto area. So I got to know him and assisted him in editing that book. There's also a book called The Invisible Rainbow, and I believe the author is based in Santa Fe, and that talks about the different types of non-ionizing radiation that we can be exposed to from our cell phones, from cell phone towers, even from our vehicles. So doing some type of digital detox and getting away from devices and really out far in nature where there are no cell phone towers or there's not much of a signal is also really important, because though that type of radiation can certainly impact the balance of minerals in our body, and calcium in the cells, for example. And I'm not fully familiar with all the mechanics. I just know that it's something that we need to pay attention to. For example, in my home, I do not have anything, even anything electrical plugged in. In my bedroom, I have a battery-powered alarm clock. I have my phone charging in another room. I don't sleep with my phone in my room ever. Even if I'm in a hotel, I'll actually just shut my phone off completely. So I try to limit my contact with that as much as is possible in our modern world.
Have you ever experienced any physical symptoms from low frequency radiation?
So that's an interesting question. And there have been a few podcasts done about how if our minerals are, I was just listening to a podcast recently about this, if our minerals are out of balance, if our ratios are out of balance in our body, we can be more vulnerable to that. Some people can experience different kinds of things like fatigue, headaches, dizziness, depending on what they feel. I can tell you that there was a point in my life where I was spending a lot of time. I lived in a very small place, and I was spending a lot of time during the day next to the Wi-Fi router. And I do feel that it affected my. There were a lot of other things going on, but I do feel that it affected me. It affected me negatively. So, and I will tell you also, it's one of those things where you're not aware of it when you're in it, but when you step out of it, you really feel a difference. So for example, a couple of years ago, I went on retreat to a monastery in New Mexico, in Pecos, which is near Santa Fe, and they didn't have any Wi-Fi there. I don't think I even brought my laptop with me. I just brought a notebook for writing, and I could feel how much more relaxed my body was being away from all kinds of most electrical devices and any type of that electromagnetic radiation that comes from our devices. It was, for me, it was, I have a lot of self-awareness and kinesthetic awareness. So it was really, if it makes sense to say, it was really palpable for me.
All right, I believe you. I have a friend who lived in Denver, and when the 5G towers went up, she developed a split in her bottom
Mm-hmm.
lip. that she couldn't
Mm-hmm.
heal until she
Mm-hmm.
started wearing a shungite necklace.
Mm-hmm.
And now there's all this EMF jewelry and
Mm-hmm.
it's made out of shungite. I'm
Mm-hmm.
wearing a shungite necklace right now. I don't, I don't think that it affects me to that kind of a degree. And it might, because I'm certainly aware of the phenomenon of just staring at my phone with like, dead scrolling or doom scrolling, and I'm not even looking at anything. It's hypnotized me.
Sure.
Um, but I wear it anyway. And I've also noticed a phenomenon that if my phone is in my pocket, I want to touch it. If I don't carry my phone with me, I never reach for it.
That's interesting.
And so I don't know if that's even something that I hate for this to sound conspiratorial, but who cares? I wonder if that's even a design in the feature to make us want to touch it. Because if the phone makes money from us looking at apps and for us
Sure.
being on the phone, it seems at first you have to get us to use it.
Sure. That's true.
And we're magnetic on the inside.
Absolutely. There's an excellent film that I would recommend on YouTube. It's an older film. It's called Beings of Frequency. I don't know if you ever saw it, but anybody listening, I would recommend checking it out. And it talks about how we are electromagnetic beings, and there are certain frequencies that we are very much in tune with, and others that can be very disruptive, not only to humans, but also to birds. They talk about how birds chart their course according to certain frequencies, and also there are some experiments that have been done with bees, and bees dying off because of this electromagnetic pollution. And one of the challenges with that, like the ionizing radiation, is that we can't see it, right? We can walk outside into a beautiful environment and say, oh, wow, look at this beautiful nature. But there could be several cell phone towers nearby with that radiation that we can't even see. But of course, other organisms are vulnerable to that. So I definitely recommend people check out Beings of Frequency.
That's interesting. I do remember I stayed in Taos 2 years ago and I was in an Earth ship. I was in the
Mm-hmm.
first Earth ship that was ever built. Michael, somebody did it, like the guy that started the Earth ship movement. And I didn't communicate with him. I communicated with someone who communicated for him. And I remember how calm it felt. And my phone was around, but the whole bathroom had wooden floors
Mm-hmm.
um, and there wasn't any material that could conduct a lot of electricity. And then I was up on this mountain and it was a dirt road. I saw a skunk. And there skunks exist in South Carolina, but we never see them. Sometimes we smell them when they get hit in the road, but
Right.
we hardly ever see them. And I saw a skunk, and I just remember um, how quiet it was. I didn't hear the Taos hum. I was hoping to hear it, but I
Mm-hmm.
probably could have. And time seems to move a little bit different in New Mexico, especially in the high
That's
country.
that is certainly true. And I'm from the East Coast, so I'm used to, and I've lived in a lot of other places in the world, and I can be used to a more faster pace of life. It has definitely taken some getting used to. They call it land of mañana here. Not just in Taos, but certainly, Taos is an area that is known for being very therapeutic and restorative. And it, Taos is a place I've been traveling there for over 20 years, since my parents moved there. My dad still lives up there, and it's always challenged to retain its smallness and its charm, because lots of people are, and it's going through some growing pains right now. Lots of people want to discover it and appreciate all of those charms and the quiet. Certainly when I go visit my dad, I'm really struck by how quiet is there when I wake up in the morning, versus where I live in Albuquerque, where there's just traffic and sirens and things that you can experience in modern life. But Taos also has a kind of spiritual magic as well, which has drawn many people, that a certain allure that has drawn many people over the years.
Julia Roberts lives in Taos County. I know that she lives there, and she's kind of a
That
Hindu
is
now.
true. That I'm sorry, she's kind of what?
Oh,
That cut out a little
I
bit
think
there.
that yeah, I think the signal's just messing up a little. She's kind of a Hindu now, I think.
Okay, that That I'm not familiar with what her current practices may be. My mom, a number of years ago, did see her in town at a place called Jack Rabbit, which is a shipping and packing store. And she said that people were other customers were in the store, they were busy with their packages, and no one really even gave Julia Roberts a second glance, which Julia Roberts appreciated. She appreciates, as far as I understand, sort of being able to be anonymous in Taos without people coming up and asking for autographs or gawking.
That's interesting. I I don't know if I just heard an internet rumor that she was kind of Hindu now. I knew that she did that movie Eat, Pray, Love, and that I think it was one of those clickbait articles that you see on
I
your
see.
when you open up your work internet, and then you see celebrities that have given up Christianity. And I clicked through it. I think Julia Roberts was in there. Um, but speaking of Taos, have you ever heard of Natalie Goldberg?
The name is familiar.
I think February 19th is Natalie Goldberg Day in Taos. And she is famous for writing a book called Writing Down the Bones, which sold, I think it has sold over 1 million copies. And I think that's kind of been her thing that led her to do everything else, to write about Taos, to write more books about writing and things like that. But you mentioned a method that she recommends, and that's writing in the notebook. Is that how you
Mm-hmm.
always begin your first draft?
I would say no. It's an interesting question because and I might have tweeted a little bit about this, when I got to college, this was a long time ago. When I got to college, at that point, we didn't all have laptops. We didn't have our own computers. And at my college, there was a computer lab, and they had some Macs and they had some PCs, and you had to sign up to use them. So you would write down your drafts or your ideas, and then you would go to the computer and type them up and then print them out. And one of my professors advised me to skip the handwritten step and get comfortable composing at the computer. So I did, because it's certainly practical. When you're in college, you may not even have the time to be, and wasn't at that point a quick typist. And so I got used to composing at the computer. Now I tend to use a bit of a combination of approaches. Of course, I do a lot of work on the computer, but I tend to get inspiration when I'm not at the computer. So I'll be walking around and I'll write something in a notebook, or I'll write something on a piece of paper in my kitchen. If especially certain phrases that I feel they just kind of come to me. This is how I want to phrase this. And so I'll write that down. So I tend to use a sort of combined approach, although I would like to get a little bit more into writing on paper, although I'm now very unaccustomed to it and my hand gets tired. It's very different from when I was in high school and we would, be writing during lengthy periods while we were taking a test.
Hmm. When we see your blogs, is that all that you're writing, that you're drafting? Are you writing other things that we don't see that's more creative as far as poetry or fiction?
So that's a great question. I love the question. So I have considered myself a writer since I was very small. I always had a very active imagination, and my mom saved a lot of my stories that I wrote. I got really good grades when I was in elementary school, middle school, even high school, for my creativity. And then I was in college. I didn't really focus much on and I graduated from college a long time ago, but I focused more on writing papers and not much on fiction. It's interesting, around 2009, when I was living in Canada, I started taking some writing workshops and really focused almost exclusively on writing fiction. Although at that point I didn't have a blog, I wasn't publishing anything. So what I publish now on my blog and on Substack tends to be nonfiction. The fiction pieces I write, I haven't really had the guts to post yet, although I'm thinking about creating a section of my website for fiction pieces. And my genre is very much, I would say, romance with the goal of being towards literary fiction, what's called, at least in Canada, literary fiction. So that's the genre that I hope to write in and to think about more. I have 5 or 6 draft blog posts and articles that I want to get done that I keep telling my Twitter followers I'm going to finish. So it's sort of my goal to crank out some of that. And poetry is not something I've written. It's interesting you ask about poetry, not since I was probably in high school, although when I was cleaning out some papers, I found a poem from, I don't know, grade 3 maybe, that was published in the town paper, which was sort of cute. So it made me think, well, maybe I'll return to that at some point.
I think when we first start writing, we all write 18th century English poems because that's what we've
Mm-hmm.
heard until we begin writing. Just so we can have it on record, you're an American who lived in Canada, or were you Canadian? Because you mentioned East Coast, and I assumed United States.
Well, so just so we have it on record, I was born in the US. I am a US citizen. I also have Slovenian citizenship because I lived in Slovenia for 8 years and I was able to obtain that citizenship through my family roots. And that's another story. And so I now have the dual citizenship. I worked for a global company, and so I traveled a lot and I had the opportunity to live in different countries. I lived in France, I lived in Slovenia, I lived in the Czech Republic, Canada. I also did a sabbatical in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So a lot of my life was spent, I think actually in my Twitter bio, it says real food and travel lover, because I do love travel and also living abroad, because when you're living in a different country, you have an opportunity to go much deeper into the culture and of course the language than when you're just passing through and on a shorter stay.
I think Mila Goldberg, who wrote Bee Season, lived in Czech Republic, and she loved how cheap it was there.
Mm-hmm.
She said like $90 you could live for a month. And I think they didn't even have self-adhesive stamps. You had to lick your stamps up until like 2009, I
Oh,
thought.
that's probably true. I remember actually being when I lived in Slovenia. I don't know that they ever had during the time I was there, and I left there in 2009, and I traveled a few times since then. But I remember at the post office when you would buy the stamps, and at the postal clerk would have a little container of water with a small sponge in it, and then would moisten the stamp and put it on the letter for you. So it's funny. I actually never even thought about self-adhesive stamps being a thing until this conversation.
Yeah, because it was a little bit behind or old school. The where Who did you work with in your writing workshops in Canada?
So that's an interesting question. And I do believe that in all of these situations, there's always some kind of divine guidance that brings me to the resource that I need. And I'm not sure how I even found out about these workshops, but I worked with, and I still even probably maybe last year, attended a virtual workshop. There's a man named Brian Henry, and he is an editor, and now he worked in the publishing industry as an editor for many years, and now he primarily does editing work, freelance, and then also leads writing workshops on all different types of topics. And part of the reason that I chose to work with him, I was living in the suburbs of Toronto, and he would have workshops in that area, but also in downtown Toronto. So I would go and attend these workshops. And what attracted me to his workshops was what he had written in his bio was his proudest boast is that he has helped many of his students to get published. And I thought that sounded like something that would be really good to work with someone who's helped people to get published. And I've never been published. And that's another discussion. Some of his former students have gone on to become New York Times bestselling authors, and I think one of them even came into the workshop and gave a presentation sometime. So it was just really cool, and he's certainly a very supportive person and really able to give workshops on a lot of different topics. I don't think he has a website, but I think he has a blog that you can subscribe to. And I think it's called Quick Brown Fox Blogspot. So if you Google Brian Henry Canada, Quick Brown Fox Blogspot, then you'll be taken to his work. And because of COVID, actually, he started offering virtual workshops. So it was really wonderful. I was able to join one of his workshops here from New Mexico. And there were a couple people from the US. Most of the participants were from Canada. Most of the participants in these workshops tend to be women. And it was great. And it was exciting for me because I left Canada in 2012. So this was actually my first workshop with him in almost 10 years. And it was exciting because I was able to say, since that time, I've started my own blog, and I also write articles on Substack, and that was pretty cool. Even though I haven't been published by a mainstream publisher, I'm putting my work out there, and I have to say that certainly attending those workshops helped to give me more confidence in my writing. And of course, you get feedback, and Canada's a little different from the US. Canadians are very harmony oriented, so they tend to be super supportive, and they're not very harsh in their criticism, which can also be really just therapeutic and helpful when you're just getting started and you're building, a lot of people have self-doubt, and you're wondering, can I actually do this? Is anybody even going to want to read what I write?
Hmm. Did a lot of people drink in the workshops when you were attending them in person? Did they like go out to drink afterwards?
You mean you don't mean during the workshop, you mean afterward, that they would
Afterwards.
socialize with each other? Because I don't, I mean, assume that people drank water or coffee during the workshop, but I don't know what they did after. I don't know. I never socialized with anybody from them, so I don't really know.
I remember in the workshops that I attended, when I went to MFA school, drinking was a thing. We would meet at the
Mm-hmm.
bar, and and it was fun. And I would always limit myself. It was a joke. I would say, I'm just gonna have one Boilermaker. And I would
Mm-hmm.
really just have one, but it's a pretty strong drink to have just one. And now, as I have learned more about terrain theory, I've stopped drinking alcohol. And that's why tonight I'm actually only having Brita filtered water. I want to get a better
Okay.
filter,
Well,
but
you've
I'm
got
having,
a beautiful glass. Yours is even a little bit more fancy than mine.
is yours
So that's
filtered?
certainly very, I'm sorry?
Is yours filtered water?
This is actually spring water.
Spring
So yeah.
water? Did you
Hmm.
get it from a spring or did you buy it?
No, I purchase it. Hmm.
Okay. We have a lot of aquifers in the South, and there's a couple of famous ones near where I am, but I've never gotten
So
from them.
yeah, so a lot of the people you were talking about being in an MFA program and going out to socialize with other students, and so that may have been a little bit the difference, because in these workshops, of course, most of the time you were with people you had never met before, and in the next group you might be with a few familiar people, but usually not. And a lot of people, they were doing this kind of as a side activity, so they wanted to get back to their families or whatever. So there wasn't, no one ever invited me to socialize, and I don't know whether people did.
Well, they made it seem like it was fun, and they also made it seem like writing was really hard and you had to do it. I can't write if I've had any alcohol. Like if I drink that day,
Mm-hmm.
I can't write because I don't want to. I don't have the motivation. And then I was experimenting with alcohol to see what I could get away with. And I found that even after just one glass of wine, the next day, the thoughts just won't come.
Mm-hmm.
I tried in a notebook, I tried on the computer, I tried morning, noon, and night, just trying to do 2 pages, and it was like
Interesting.
pulling teeth. It was very difficult. And I thought, okay, I'm not doing this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I say, maybe if I write a book, then I'll have a drink again.
Right.
But because I don't, I will have succeeded. But for right now, I'm not. And and there are some things I miss about it. Like I love a Manhattan, but um but now I'm just so interested in terrain theory and what alcohol does to your immune system. It suppresses it, and all the research that alcohol does this or how this much drinking can do this. I've heard that is all nonsense. So, and I realized that my family actually practiced terrain theory all along. If
In
you
what
get to,
way? What were some things that you observed?
they were conscious of getting run down. We called it getting run.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And in 2001, I was in a car accident and I ruptured my spleen. and that had to get removed. And because of that, I'm considered immunocompromised.
Okay.
A lot of your white blood cells mature in the spleen. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
have them, so my liver holds onto them as much as they can and then releases them. And they're kind of juveniles fighting diseases. So I am susceptible to encapsulated bacteria, which I think is gram positive when you test for it. And like I think you mentioned me in your blog anonymously. I really appreciate that I hadn't been on antibiotics since August. I have broken that streak, and I'm very sorry to report that. But I I had an extra amoxicillin prescription, and I had some kind of pharyngitis, and I just couldn't get over it, and I didn't think it was viral, so I was resisting it. I was resisting for a couple of days taking because I didn't want to break my streak. It'd been 10 months. But I just had to give in and start, and I got better, so that's good. But um, up until that point, I made it through all of winter. I made it through two surgeries where mom had to go to the hospital, and then she had one emergency trip, and we were in the emergency room with people that had flu and COVID, and we didn't get anything. And I didn't get
Mm-hmm.
anything, which was even more of a miracle because I'm immunocompromised, and I credit it to terrain theory. I pay attention to when I get to sleep. I pay attention to how much protein I'm eating.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a little bit aware of how much sugar that I eat. I still eat sugar. I like it. But I know that sometimes it's very easy to substitute a meal with sugar, with something like
That's
ice cream. And so I
That's certainly true. And sugar is highly addictive. I think there's a book called Sugar Blues or The Sugar Blues, something about that. And there is certainly a lot of sugar in foods that we can consume that are available to us. It's really interesting you were talking about not getting sick, because I was just reading a tweet today from one of my mutuals who was talking about some of the very early studies that were done in the early 20th century, trying to test out germ theory and prove that people were getting sick from germs, and they would have people coughing on other people and sneezing on them, and doing other similar types of experiments to see if they could make take people who were sick and make other people sick, and those experiments failed. They were not able to make people sick. There was one case where this was so interesting, where somehow one of the subjects was told, okay, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to make you see if you get sick, if somebody coughs on you. So then he started showing symptoms. And then they told him, the researchers told him, oh no, sorry, you were misinformed. And then his symptoms started to disappear. And it really makes you think about how powerful our consciousness is. And certainly one of the challenges that we've seen in the last few years as, and maybe this is not where you were going with this discussion, but certainly seeing the constant pressure of fear on us. And as a matter of fact, I have a tweet that I haven't posted yet talking about, so in terms of mineral balancing, there's something called the anthropomorphic qualities of minerals. So minerals have different qualities, and the copper is associated with a lot of emotionality and also specifically with fear. And what I read today is not only can you have a situation where having excess copper makes you fearful, being fearful can make you retain copper and develop copper excess. So it's incredible how our consciousness can influence our body in different ways. And this is not something that we hear much about in the mainstream medicine.
do germs exist at all?
So that's a good question. And there are people I follow on Twitter who are far more knowledgeable about this topic than I am. So there's certainly a school. So I want to distinguish between bacteria and viruses. So there's a school, and I am not highly informed on this, but there's a school who state that the viruses, specifically SARS-CoV-2, has never been isolated, and so viruses don't exist. And what people are seeing when they look at this debris in the cell is actually toxic waste from the cell, just the body being under stress or exposed to toxins. So that's on the virus side. On the bacteria side, I'm pretty sure that it's well established that bacteria exist. The question is whether they actually make you sick, or if, as I wrote in my blog post, if your terrain is weak, then you're more vulnerable to whatever quote pathogens unquote are around. So the idea of germ theory is that, and again, I'm not fully familiar with all the elements of this, but the idea of germ theory is that there are various pathogens, quote unquote, that make us sick, and that these are contagious, and that we can spread these germs. Specifically viruses, bacteria obviously are a little bit different, but we can be exposed to them and then get sick. And the question is whether is it really germs that are making us sick, or as Dr. Tom Cowan and Dr. Andy Kaufman have said in their videos, and they have been very vocal, I would say, over the last 3 years in talking about this topic. The two things that tend to make people sick are some kind of nutritional deficiency or exposure to toxins. And we talked earlier about, we're in this stew of all kinds of toxins around us.
Well, I can pinpoint two things I was doing incorrectly with my terrain when I got sick recently. And I blamed that. I believed that I got weak and could no longer fight it off. I was eating like canned meat. I was eating deviled ham and chicken spread, which is fine, but just not enough calories.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was the sun. We have sunrise at like 6:30 right now. And so if I go to bed at midnight, I'm only getting 6 hours of sleep because I'm up when the sun comes up. And so I'm not getting as much sleep. And I knew that was a problem. And I was trying to go to bed earlier and earlier, but I'm both a night owl and an early bird.
So it's a little tricky because people do have different biorhythms. My sister told me once years ago that every hour before midnight is worth 2 hours after midnight. And I find this to be true. If I go to bed at 9 and I get up at 5, that's a completely different sleep than if I sleep from 12 to 8. And as I get older, this is more, and I would say this is more pronounced. I feel this in a more pronounced way.
Say that again. Every
So
hour
every
before
hour before midnight is worth 2 hours after midnight.
meaning
In terms of being having the possibility to rejuvenate and regenerate and support the body and be more restful. This is another topic we could have a lengthy discussion on. I read an article about 10 years ago talking about what sleep was like before electricity. And people used to go to bed very early because they only had candlelight. Candles were expensive, or you were by the fire. Then you would go to bed very early. People would talk about a second sleep. You would have your first sleep, and then you would get up in the middle of the night sometimes, and then you would have a second sleep, and then they would still get up quite early, but they might be going to bed at 7 o'clock. And in the middle of the night, of course, they didn't have electric lights, but they might have had a candle, or they went outside in the moonlight. Sometimes they would visit neighbors, socialize, do other things that we can do in the middle of the night, and then they would go back to sleep. And I think in our modern world, the thinking is if you don't go to bed and sleep 8 hours straight, then you have insomnia, and that's really not necessarily the case. So I try to, if I do wake up at night, which sometimes happens, especially if there's a full moon, I try to use that time constructively, not tossing and turning, but praying or thinking about different things that projects that I want to work on.
Okay, so each hour before midnight, I'm bad with numbers, and maybe people out here are getting it before I am. Mention in the comments, explain it to me simply. Each hour before midnight is worth 2 after midnight. So,
Right.
so if you go to bed at 10, that's better than going to bed at. If you go to bed at 10 and then wake up at 4, that is better than going. The equivalent would be going to bed
Correct.
at 12 and waking up at 8.
Correct. Exactly right. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And
I've noticed that I'll dream more if I fall asleep in the morning. Like if I stay up till midnight, wake up at 6:30, and then I'm able to go back to sleep, I'll
mm-hmm.
dream. But if I go to bed early, I tend to not dream.
That's interesting. Well, Everybody does have a little bit of a different biorhythm. I notice for myself, my most vivid dreams are in the early morning before I wake up, probably between 3 to 5 or 4 to 6. And they say that that is because that's the period during which the veil between the spiritual and the physical world is the thinnest.
Hmm.
But sleep is something that's really completely individual. I know what has worked for me. I need to be in bed by 9:30, 10 at the absolute latest. That's what works for me at this point in my life.
I procrastinate sleep. I have FOMO, fear of missing out.
Mm-hmm.
And I expressed this one day to someone at work, and she said, "You're missing out on sleep." And then I was like, "Oh, that's what I'm missing out on." I knew I was missing out on something. And so I've been able to go to sleep a little bit more. And I do think that at least consciously trying to get to bed earlier rather than procrastinating and being like, "Oh God, it's 2 a.m. I got to be up in 4 hours." I
Ooh,
think that I have
4 hours, I would be in rough shape if I slept at this point in my life. Certainly when I was in college, I had some short nights and even all-nighters, which is not something that I do anymore. I think it's really important, since we're on this topic, I think it's really important to have a sleep hygiene routine, and I'm pretty strict about that. First of all, I wear, when I'm looking at my devices during the day and even in the evening, I wear glasses that have a blue blocking filter. So to block the blue light, because that really disrupts our circadian rhythm. Also, I try to turn off my devices at least 1 to 1.5 hours before I'm going to bed. And then I go into my near infrared sauna, and that stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. And so that has a very, oh my goodness, I'm ready. I fall asleep within 2 minutes of my head hitting the pillow pretty much every night.
Do you have an infrared sauna?
Mm-hmm.
Is it big or is it just a mask
No,
that you wear?
it has three. I got it in Canada actually. It was made by an electrician. It has three bulbs, and you can use it, for example, in your shower, kind of so you're in an enclosed area.
Okay.
It not while the shower is running, obviously, because you don't mix electricity and water, but it's in a frame that can rest on the side of the tub.
Are you a night bather or a morning bather or showerer?
Uh, both. I actually prefer to shower in the evening because I find that very relaxing. If I shower in the morning, then I'm feeling relaxed instead of energized. So but that's a more recent preference.
I started showering at night because it's a better morning routine, and and I wonder if that helps me to sleep well. I've never had a problem sleeping. I've been a lucky person. Everyone that I've ever slept with is irritated by how quickly I fall asleep. It's like
Mm-hmm.
I'll talk, 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 and then as soon as the head hits the pillow, I'm gone.
Mm-hmm.
I have a friend, it's a couple friend, and the wife sleeps really well, and the husband doesn't sleep well. And he said, "What is the secret to sleeping well?" And she said, "Okay, I'm going to tell you the trick." And he got comfortable. He was waiting to hear the secret that he was missing out on his whole life. She said, "Step one, get real comfortable." Now, that means different things for different people. For me, it's lying on my back with my leg tucked. You
Sure.
might want to have two pillows. You might want to sleep on your side. Just get real comfortable. She said, "Step
Mm-hmm.
two, close your eyes." And then she said, "And then it's morning." And then it's morning. And that's literally the way it is for me too. And he was very upset because it's just not easy for him what it is for me.
Some people definitely have challenges. That's for sure. And I used to actually, we didn't really talk that much about minerals, but copper zinc imbalance and excess copper is definitely associated with anxiety and also with insomnia. And there was a period where I had a lot of excess copper, and I had a terrible time sleeping. I couldn't fall asleep. I couldn't stay asleep. I would wake up and have anxiety, and now all those problems are gone.
How can you get rid of copper?
So that's a great question. And I realize that we may not have time to go into too many details about it, but I mentioned, kind of to link back to the beginning of the program, I was talking about nutritional program that I've been following, which balances mineral ratios and this is something that you work with a practitioner who helps you to balance these ratios, and then to strengthen the body's own detoxification organs, which are the liver and the kidneys, so that they can, so that the copper can be then, released from the body.
Does this program have a name, or is it just something that is individual that you work with a practitioner to get?
So it does have a name. It's called either nutritional balancing or development. And this was based on the work of a biochemist named Dr. Paul Eck. He passed away, I think, in the late 80s. But another practitioner, Dr. Lawrence Wilson, has carried on the work and has trained a number of practitioners, some of whom still work directly with him, some of whom have gone out on their own.
All right. Well, when you said Paul, it reminded me of Paul Leslie. And Paul Leslie has a great podcast called The Paul Leslie Hour. It started as a radio show in Atlanta. He now lives in Charleston and carries on the podcast across the country. He just interviewed Bob McGill, a country songwriter, at his home in Nashville. And it was a live interview with cameras, and so it's cool. He's a really cool guy. But Paul Leslie recommends turning over the last part of the interview to the guest so that she can say whatever is on her heart or her mind, knowing that it has the potential to reach anyone and everyone across the entire world and maybe beyond. So now is that time. What would you like to say?
How much time do I have?
As much as you need.
Because there are a lot of different things that I could talk about. So I want to touch on a couple of things that I think are health, obviously, and vitality are really important to me. So as I mentioned before, I really do encourage people to pay attention to nourishing themselves, eating the best quality food they can afford. I know that prices are high now, and with inflation, it just seems like things keep going up, but I do encourage people to seek out the best quality food they can afford, and to shop locally, to find farmers markets, to find local ranchers, and support these local producers. That is extremely important, especially in the United States, where we have a very large industrialized agriculture system. So I really encourage people to focus on that aspect of health, because it's really essential. You talked about school lunch critic at the beginning. So I think paying attention to children's nutrition is also really important, and ensuring that children are eating a lot of whole foods. A lot of animal foods are really important for children. I know there's the push towards plant-based diets, and that is not beneficial for children. In my Substack post, which was called Decolonize Your Plate, writing about children's nutrition and school performance, I believe that a lot of behavioral issues and school performance issues could be improved with better nutrition. And there's a lot more detail in my Substack article about that, but really focusing on whole foods, and especially animal foods. And especially animal fats are very important for children. There, in the recent decades, there's been kind of a fear of fats, and saturated fats have been demonized, and they're very important for our health. So certainly, and as a matter of fact, in my last blog post, I talked about a friend of mine who read my article and has two middle school aged boys at home. And the family was mostly using olive oil, and they added some high quality butter to their diet. And she told me, my younger son doesn't crave sweets anymore, and after dinner he's asking for bread and butter for dessert. He's not asking for sweets. So it was a great testimonial, and not at all surprising to me, because if people are craving sweets, sometimes that means they need more fat in their diet, and butter is a great place to start with that. So I would say really focusing on quality nutrition is something that is essential for all of us. If you allow me, I will read a quotation.
Yeah, please do.
From Weston Price. Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. Didn't have much time to talk about this. This was actually the book that prompted my piece on Substack about children's nutrition and school performance, because Dr. Price was trying to see how, he was a dentist, he wanted to see how he could improve children's teeth, and he developed a special dietary program for some children who were having a lot of tooth decay. And he wrote that while he was administering this program, which was just to give them a very good lunch, which included a meat stew with some vegetables. They had 2 glasses of milk, which was probably raw milk, and I think some pureed apples, something like that. And of course, no sugar. And he said that 2 different teachers came to him to ask him what had been done to take one of the poorest performing students in the class and make that student into one of the best. So I found that so interesting. He wasn't trying to improve school performance, but this better nutrition improved the student's cognitive ability and school performance. And that was what really drove me to write that article. There is another section that I'm not able to find the quotation right now, but he talks about certain foods that are beneficial for our development as humans and take us to higher values than just the material world. And even though I'm a capitalist and I support the free market, we can't just be focused on money. There are other realms that are important as well. And it's my personal belief that focusing on our food will help to make a better society for everyone.
Thank you, Katharine Spehar.
My pleasure.
Oh, and before we go, where can we find your Substack?
So my Substack, it's my name again, Katharine Spehar. I think it's Katharine Spehar Substack.com. I don't remember the exact link for Substack.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.